Hello, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kaylan Ashcroft. Thanks for watching another video on our leaders. Today we will be covering Mohammed Abdul Hamid, the current president of Bangladesh, and Abdel el-Sisi, the current president of Egypt. So I think this will be a very cool video. I think these are two very, very important leaders and representing two very important events that have happened in recent history. Similarly, I think we'll have a very cool discussion on some ancient Egypt mythology at the end, and it all kind of, I think, comes together very nicely and will be relevant for any other research into leadership or politics or government. So without further ado, we shall begin with Abdul Hamid. So Abdul Hamid is a politician and current president of Bangladesh. He was elected to his first term on April of 2013, and he's been re-elected to a second term in 2018, therefore actually technically making him the longest serving president in the history of Bangladesh. Previously, he was also acting president after the death of President Zilar Rahman, who had to give up his presidency to go into hospital in Singapore in March of 2013. And as a result, Hamid took over as president, and he has served since then. He previously served as Speaker of the National Parliament, or the Jatiya Sangsad, or just the JS. As mentioned in previous videos, it's very common for a lot of presidents, prime ministers to formally serve as Speaker of the House. It tends to be a common career path for these leaders. A little bit of background about the Jatiya Sangsad. It has about 350 seats, actually 50 of which are reserved for females, which I think is quite a progressive thing to have in a parliament. It's considered to be the House of Nation and the supreme legislative body in Bangladesh. So as mentioned, he's the longest serving president in history, combining the period that he was president after Zilar had to step down as president up until now on his second term. He's a little bit of background about Bangladesh. If you don't know, it's the 8th most populous country in the world with about 161 million people, so it's very, very large. However, it doesn't. GDP is not is quite a bit lower, thus not rendering it the 8th largest. However, given it's being the 8th largest country by population, it actually only is the 92nd in terms of land mass, so that's quite a bit down on the list. So it's one of the most densely populated countries in the world. He's the first president of Bangladesh, modern day Bangladesh, after its independence from Pakistan, was Sheikh Rahman in 1971. He was the cabinet. So there's a legislative body called the House of Nations, through which Hamid was part of, but also there's the cabinet, which is like the executive branch of the government, very much similar to most I would consider Western democracies, where there's the judicial branch, an executive branch, and a legislative branch. The cabinet is headed by the president as well. So the constitution was officially adopted in 1972. So one of the reasons why he's the longest serving president in Bangladesh history is that it's actually a relatively new country. The constitution was only adopted in 1972. And therefore he's the 16th president of Bangladesh as well. 9 out of the 19 elections of Bangladesh have been ruled by the Awami League, or the Baksel party. So it's symbolically the Green Party, but it's not like green is in terms of environmental party. However, 5 of the 19 elections have been won by the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. So he's part of the more successful party, generally speaking, and similarly, the very first president was also from his same party. But nonetheless, we'll get into much more of this in his actual political philosophy once we get later. But as normal, we will start with his early life and education. So he was born on January 1st, 1944, so the very first day of the year, which actually makes explaining his ages throughout the dates very easily, whereas, for example, someone who's born in November, as we'll see with el-Sisi, if it's I don't know, XX year. It could be before, he could be one age, or he could be another age. For Hamid, he's always going to be the same age for every given year, so that makes things quite easily. So he was born in Kamalpur village, which is in a suburb of Dhaka, a little ways away from the center, but nonetheless a very, very populated region. It's known for the Battle of Kamalpur, which was engaged by the Bangladesh forces, where they fought against the Pakistani army in 1971 in the War of Independence, and the independence from Bangladesh from Pakistan. As you know, before that, even Pakistan was split up from India in 1947 in the Indo-Pakistani War, particularly the Indo-Pakistani War was 1947 to 1948, which was mostly after the British had moved out of India and Pakistan. They were essentially, the two regions were already divided. However, there was many fights over the Kashmir region, and we're still seeing fights over the Kashmir region, as you might have seen in the Modi documentary that I created. The Kashmir region is predominantly a Muslim region of India, and they kind of would like to join as part of Pakistan or get absolute independence, because their treatment isn't quite fully fair. I think most people would agree. So nonetheless, the War of Indo-Pakistani War from 1947 to 1948. So this is some important context to take into account, but prior to Bangladesh's War of Independence in the 1970s from Pakistan. Kashmir actually is no longer fully controlled by India, as mentioned earlier, but it is still they no longer completely administered by India. However, they still are subjected to some maltreatment, and they're still technically part of India. In terms of Dhaka, where Hamid was born, it's the capital and largest city in Bangladesh at 21,006,000 people, the 9th largest city in the world, so very, very large. It's and it's also the 6th most dense in the world, so very big and dense city. Hamid went to the village primary school. And then after the primary school, he went to study live with his relatives in Barabpur region, or Barab, at Barab School, Barab KB Pilot High School for secondary education. There he passed his IA, which is like his high school or maybe first year university equivalent, and he achieved or received a Bachelor of Arts from Garadayal Government College in Kishoreganj. There he actually met the college in Kishoreganj is actually called a government college, so they do have some notable individuals who have made it into government from that school, notably Amir Hussain, who is a justice in the Supreme Court. So evidently, I think it's we can probably conclude that Hamid had his eye set on politics from a pretty early age. I don't think it was his parents particularly forcing him down this path. I think he sort of found it himself, and I think he's always been pretty interested in politics. He attained an LLB, a Bachelor of Law, from Central Law College, which is part of the Dhaka University. Dhaka University is one of the top universities in Bangladesh, being in the state capital, or the capital of the country, pardon me. Others might consider the National University of Bangladesh to be number one, but it's all disputed. There's also Rajshahi University, which is probably considered to be number 3, but some might even consider it to be number 1. And then also there's, for example, Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology, which is a more technical school, kind of equivalent to like MIT, which, as we know, Benjamin Netanyahu went to, but that's in the United States. But nonetheless, he went to Dhaka University, which actually happens to be in the capital. It's the oldest university in Bangladesh, and it actually played a large role of developing progressive, nationalist, and democratic processes, and it was one of the focal points of the War of Independence in 1971. So obviously an important place for him to study, and he was probably a large influence on this as well. He joined the Kishoreganj bar after graduating from his Bachelor of Law as a lawyer, and he actually climbed up to become president of the Kisharanganj Bar Association 5 times between 1990 to 1996. So a pretty successful lawyer, but obviously, as we can see, he was probably more interested in actual politics and sort of saw studying the law and associating himself with the law as a not only a means to an end, but also a means to improve himself and to learn and to be worthy of the role he wanted to achieve. In his studies, he actually joined the Chhatra League in 1959 when he was only 15 years old as a student in Kasharanganj. It was the Chhatra League. Actually, I have an image here. That's the symbol of the Chhatra League. Is the second from the top right. It is a youth organization founded by Sheikh Rahman, the first president of modern-day Bangladesh. It's basically it's the youth organization of the Baskel Party, or the Awami League. He actually went on to become vice president of the Chhatra League of the Gurandale Government College. So his undergraduate or late high school, he became vice president of this youth organization at his school. But it must be noted, actually, and I think this is just for anyone out there, or just in terms of motivation, he actually never became president of the student union. So, for example, in the video on Boris Johnson was dead set on becoming head of the student union, and he really struggled with it and saw it as something that was necessary to become president. But Hamid, perhaps for a variety of reasons, wasn't the president, but vice president seemed to be sufficient in facilitating his way to ultimately become president of the country. So I don't know to what extent he struggled trying to become president, or if he just wanted vice president, but he obviously didn't see just because he was vice president that he was bound to be second place his whole life. Continuing on in 1966 to 1967, when he was 22 to 23 years old, he actually became vice president of the Chhatra League of the Mime Singh district unit. So he became one of the vice presidents of the youth organization in Dhaka, a district of Dhaka. In 1969, when he was 25 years old, he joined the official Awami League, Baskel, which is the non-youth movement equivalent of the Chhatra League, which also was founded by Sheikh Rahman, the first president of Bangladesh. In 1970, in the general elections, when he was only 26 years old, he was elected to be a member of parliament for Mime Singh District 18 constituency, and he was actually the youngest member of parliament elected at this time. And this was just coming up to the War of Independence as well. So obviously, I think it was because he sort of had these progressive beliefs, and he'd been involved in the party for a long time, and he went to University of Dhaka, which was more progressive and a leading influence in terms of the independence and political movements at the time. And then continuing on in 1973, 1986, 1996, 2001, 2009, he was elected continuously as Member of Parliament. Well, there were obviously breaks in that time, but he was elected Member of Parliament for Kosharanj 5 constituency as a nominee, always with the same party, the Awami League. In 1996 to 2001, he was appointed Deputy Speaker of the House under the Awami League government. In 2001, he was appointed Deputy Leader of Opposition, replacing Shash Gupta. And in the January of 2015, he became Speaker of the National Parliament, which, as I said, in most governments, at least I know that's the case in Canada, it's not a necessary step to take, but it often is a natural progression for those who want to be head of state to go and become speaker. So he became Speaker of the National Parliament. In 2013, he was awarded during the Independence Day he was awarded the Independence Day Award for his involvement in the 1971 Bangladesh War of Independence. So as during this time, he was a member of Parliament of the Awami League, founded by the first president of Bangladesh, who was fighting for the War of Independence against Pakistan. And obviously, Hamid played a large role in this, not the largest role, but a very important role as a member of Parliament in Dhaka, and he achieved the Independence Day Award. Thus, I think partially through this momentum and through his continued involvement in the party and being speaker, which is kind of like batter up, could be like an analogy. He was appointed President Hameed on the 14th of March 2013. After Zilar Rahman went to a hospital in Singapore to become, and actually died 6 days later on March 19th or March 20th. But did Hameed, you're probably wondering, did Hameed perhaps have some involvement in the death of Zilar Rahman? Well, you could say, for example, he got sick on the 14th of March, which is actually famous in Roman history as the Ides of March. In the famous Shakespearean play, this is probably not necessarily said, but they said, "Beware the Ides of March." So Julius Caesar was, stabbed to death on the Ides of March, the 15th of March. So this individual got sick on the 14th of March, and somehow Hameed became president. But I don't think Hameed had any involvement. They were from the same party. I think Hameed knew he'd probably become president eventually anyways, and I think they had good relations, and no one has ever spoken of some conspiracy of this sort. I think he's had no involvement. But I just think it's interesting that it was on the Ides of March. So therefore, on April 22nd, he was elected, and another proof that perhaps he didn't have any people. Well, he probably didn't have any involvement in the death of Zilar because he was elected president unopposed. So there was no one questioning some kind of conspiracy. Similarly, in February of 2018, he was re-elected once again unopposed. So it seems that everyone really appreciates this individual, and no one actually has almost the confidence to really run against him. So he's got quite a cult of personality, which we'll see is even probably more representative in el-Sisi's case. But nonetheless, no one really wants to go up head to head with this individual, who's kind of one of the main symbols of the independence of Bangladesh. In terms of his time as president, he has asked the United Nations to administer a humanitarian corridor for the Rohingya Muslims, who are a minority of Muslims in the Myanmar or former-day Burma region. Obviously, these people have been unfairly treated. I don't think anyone could deny that. They are denied citizenship in Myanmar, yet they don't have freedom of movement, so they're denied citizenship, but they can't leave, so it's kind of quite unfair there. They're denied civil service jobs, and it's been compared to an apartheid in Myanmar. But nonetheless, in terms of the Pakistan-Bangladesh relations, kind of some further background about this, because I think this alludes to most of the key takeaways from his presidency. 30% of individuals in Pakistan at the time prior to independence of Bangladesh were Bengali speakers. It wasn't a separation based on religion, because both regions have about 90% majority Sunni Muslims. So it wasn't really a problem with religion. But prior to the Bangladesh War of Independence, Pakistan declared Urdu the official language of Pakistan, and the 30% Bengali speakers obviously did not think this was very fair, as we saw in many other cases. For example, in the most previous video, Ukraine was taking away language rights from German speakers in Ukraine, which is obviously not a great thing, but nonetheless, also in 1971 there was the Bangladesh genocide, and therefore under many Bengali speakers were killed by the Pakistani government. Therefore, Sheikh Rahman, the leader of the Awami League, opposed this. But I think what I want to allude to here is that the separation wasn't one done based on religion. Obviously, there are both are predominantly Sunni. They both have a little bit of a Shia presence. About 2% of Bangladesh is actually of the Bengali religion. However, it was done mostly for different, obviously, ethnic reasons, but it wasn't done on religious grounds. So with respect to the Rohingya individuals in Myanmar, I don't think he's just helping these people because they are also Muslim. It's because he sees a a crime against humanity being done in Myanmar, and he wants to speak out against it. And this is something that the UN also supports. He's so as I said, about 2% of Bangladesh is Buhari Muslim, so it's not the cause of the separation. But Myanmar, going back to the Rohingya, is about 90% Buddhist, who are, as we know, most people, like, I think a common perception is that it's Islam is the cause of a lot of violence, as we'll see in el-Sisi's video, documentary, pardon me. But, it's Buddhism, whereas many people consider it to be a fully morally aligned religion. They're the ones who are killing these individuals of Islam. So I don't think the cultural genocides that are going on are necessarily the cause of religion. Similarly, as can be seen in Israel, the Islam population are being, I think, to some extent, unfairly treated. And it's not, I don't think it's necessarily the cause of religion. All the books are, like, to be honest, the Quran, the Torah, and the New Testament are all just really, really good books. I think, for example, you can read Tolstoy, for example, War and Peace, and read it word for word, and you'll probably find some misalignments in terms of morality. However, these books are, I would say, even more precise. They're the closest approximation to absolute moral truth. They all do have small defects. However, they are good approximations to moral truth, and I do think they are good. All of them are good ways of teaching people morality. And I don't think for example, I don't think Islamic State, they're actually necessarily reading the Quran, but it's more of a cult of personality that is developing around there. But nonetheless, this is what I really wanted to emphasize with Hameed, is that what happened with Bangladesh and Pakistan was not one of religion, and that's something that I think Hameed is kind of representative of. In terms of his personal life, he's married to Rashida, an official name Rashida, in 1964 when he was 20 years old. Pretty young, but I don't think that's too young for at that time in 1964, and in at the time Pakistan, but soon to become Bangladesh. He has 3 sons and 1 daughter. As we'll see, it's actually the exact same ratio as el-Sisi, which I think is just obviously a superficial comparison between the two, but I think it's important to note. He's one of his sons, Rejwan Tufik, is actually a member of parliament, as we'll see with el-Sisi. He puts many of his own children and family members into places of power. His wife is a head teacher at what's called kindergarten school in Dhaka, which is a school for children, and she's also chairperson of President Abdul Hamid Medical College and Hospital. So she's also a very involved individual too, and someone who also deserves admiration. As I mentioned earlier, in the legislature in Bangladesh, there's 50 of the 350 seats are reserved for women. This is something that, particularly in Canada, where I am from, is quite a contested issue. Many people think that there shouldn't be quotas and such, but Bangladesh has obviously moved in quite a different direction. And for a country that has a Islam majority, Muslim majority, I think that that's something that can be said, whereas many people consider the suppression of Muslim women under Islam. Well, here's a Islam majority country, a Muslim majority country that actually has taken quite progressive steps. So maybe it's not necessarily the religion, but more just the people who are in power and representing that religion. So here are the images. Here's the flag of Bangladesh, as mentioned earlier. The population 161.4 million, making it the 8th largest in the world. GDP of 274 billion, quite small. We now have centibillionaires. Jeff Bezos has over $100 billion. A couple of Jeff Bezos and another pretty rich person would be about Bangladesh. Area is quite small too, 92nd biggest in the world at 147,570 kilometers squared. top right, we have the flag of Dhaka, which is, he was not actually born in Dhaka per se, but a village outside of Dhaka. Here's the symbol of the Chahatra League, the youth movement of that which is below, which is the Awami League, founded by the first president of Bangladesh. And the very bottom here is the seal of the president of Bangladesh. As for the quotes, anybody can join politics nowadays. If I ask for the post of superintending engineer citing my long involvement in politics, will they accept me? But politics in the country has become free for all. So what he's saying is, and I think this is a nice thing, and I think this, he said this in a speech to Dhaka University, is that politics has really now become open, even more so open than many other careers. Like he quotes that if he wanted to become a superintending engineer, he just doesn't have the credentials to do it. But politics is something that anyone could enter, which I think is obviously a good thing. We used to write love letters using nice quotations while in college. This has become obsolete now and people just text. That too using English characters to write Bangla. At least we continue to write love letters to revive our literature. So this is just, I think, evidence that he's really in tune with some of the changes that are happening in society. I think, firstly, he understands like how children or young people are texting and communicating, which is good. But also he does have a little bit of nostalgia for the things that have changed. But I think that, as we'll see in the conclusion here, is that everyone, as they get older, naturally becomes more conservative, just because they can never keep up with the progressive nature of the younger population. Those departments with less demand should be restructured to fit the present age. However, they should not serve the interests of only a few individuals, but that of the nation. I believe here he's actually speaking of certain departments within universities, and they should modernize. As mentioned earlier, he's very generally quite progressive, but also that he wants to see a sort of democratization of jobs. So as alluded to earlier, like becoming a superintending engineer is not something that is accessible to all people in Bangladesh, especially those who come from poverty. So we want to see a little bit of democratization in terms of both education and in terms of employment. So we'll talk more about Abdul Hamid, and but first let's do the biography of el-Sisi. So, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi was born on 19th of November 1954. His full name is Abdel Fattah Saeed Hussein Khalil el-Sisi. So that's quite a lot of names. We'll just refer to him as el-Sisi for the course of the video. Not a huge thing to note, but for something that just clicks into my head when I think of birth months, because I always do. My brother is also born in November, which is technically by the zodiac, the Scorpio, which is one of the 3 water signs. But also, I think what actually clicked for me, which I found surprising, is it's symbolically maroon and black, which actually happen to be the colors of the flag and of Egypt. So I just think that's quite coincidental, and I do think he's symbolically a red and black individual in the sense of temperament. Red tends to be more risk taking. Blue tends to be more conservative. I think that symbolically it comes from fruit most of the time. If you were to go fruit scavenging, if you see a blue fruit, historically it probably means you shouldn't eat it. There are obviously notable exceptions today, such as blueberries, but most fruits in nature that are blue are not good to eat. Red symbolically is a good fruit to eat. It's also a sign of fertility in people. Rosy cheeks mean flushed face. But the point is that's why humans originally got color receptors. Like dogs don't really eat berries, so they don't need to see color, but humans need to be able to spot fruit. So symbolically, I just think he's like a red, more red tends to be more risk-taking and more symbolically chaos. But we'll talk about that more in the actual Egyptian Egyptian mythology, which I'll discuss at the very end, which is also fitting because this is a video on el-Sisi, who is an Egyptian politician and the 6th and current president of Egypt. He was a former director of military intelligence, former minister of defense, and a former general. And from 2019 to 2020, he was actually the chairperson of the African Union, which is a very, very important and high role, the equivalent of the European Union, but not quite with the powers of the European Union amongst constituent states in Africa, but it is the highest governing body in Africa. In terms of his early life, he was born in Old Cairo on 19th of November, 1954. As mentioned, Cairo is the capital of Egypt with over 30 million people, even larger than Dhaka. It's the largest city in Africa, the largest city in the Middle East, and the largest city in the Arab world. It's the 6th largest overall in the entirety of the world. It's notable for, as you might know, the pyramids of Giza and close by ancient Memphis and many really important historical sites, which are some of the oldest known to humanity. He grew up in Gamaleya near Al-Azhar Mosque. It's a quarter where supposedly, truly, Jews, Christians, and Muslims all live together. He has a quote when he was younger: "I recall church bells and Jews flocked to the synagogue unhindered." What do we say here? The expectation of violence is obviously kind of foreshadowed here, but he grew up understanding different people. And as we'll see, his relations with people following Judaism is nuanced, but his relation following with respect to Christians has generally become quite positive in recent history. His family originates from Monufia Governorate, which is in the north of Egypt. He's the second of 8 children. His father actually had 6 more with a second wife. His father was a conservative Muslim, but not a radical Muslim, which we'll see is probably something very important in developing his own philosophy with respect to religion, which in many ways actually parallels Hameed, and one of the main messages that I was trying to get across with the Hameed video. His father ran a wood antique shop for tourists in the bazaar Khan el-Khalili. Not sure, he's probably no longer alive there, but in many of the bazaars there are a lot of little shops, but nonetheless not necessarily a rich upbringing, especially with a father with so many children. Evidently not too much time could have been dedicated to this child, but since he actually had a shop, a storefront, he actually probably fared generally decently well. We could call him the equivalent of middle-class Egypt. He said as a child he would study with his siblings at Al-Azhar University Library. However, unlike his brothers and sisters, particularly one of his brothers who went on to become a judge and the other went on to be a civil servant, he did not go along the academic path. Instead, he went to the local army-run secondary school. Actually, at his time at the army secondary school, he met his cousin Entisar Amur, who he ultimately married in 1977 after graduating from the Egyptian Military Academy at 25 years old. So, he married his cousin. I don't think it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think generally it's recommended for people to breed outside of their family. But, love's love. So, in terms of the Egyptian Military Academy, which he graduated in 1977 at 25 years old. It is the oldest and most prominent military academy in Egypt, and most likely in Africa as well. Another side note, I don't want to bang this to death, but symbolically the 2 colors of the country are red and black, which I really think are symbolic of el-Sisi and the country. After his graduation, he served in various command positions in the Egyptian Armed Forces. He was also a military attaché and expert in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So he got to travel outside his own country, which is important for developing his ideas. And ultimately, this kind of foreshadowed his generally pretty good relations with Saudi Arabia in the future. In 1987, when he was 33 years old, or 22, most likely 32 years old when it started, as mentioned, because his birthday's in November, so November is quite a bit later in the year, so most likely 32 years old, he started attending the Egyptian Command and Staff College. In 1992, when he was 37 years old, he enrolled in the British Command and Staff College, so he got to go to the UK to sort of further develop his global ideas and sort of get a better perspective of what the world looked like. And in 2006, at 52 years old, he enrolled in the United States Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Which also, as mentioned in a previous documentary, Muhammadu Buhari, the president of Nigeria, also went to the United States Army War College. However, Buhari graduated in 1980, so quite a bit before el-Sisi, and el-Sisi graduated in starting in 2006. So they never met each other there, but nonetheless, they were both educated of warfare in the West and evidently understanding of the military community in the United States, which would be important for ultimately his role as president. In the Egyptian Revolution of 2011 is when his political involvement starts escalating. When he was 56 years old, he became the youngest member of the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. He was also director of Military Intelligence and Reconnaissance Department. During the Egyptian 2011 revolution, 846 people were killed and 6,000 were injured. There were protests against the Mubarak presidency, predominantly against, firstly, just Mubarak's ways, but there was also much police brutality, which it was in response to, but also probably the cause of, and also protests against free speech. So evidently the Mubarak government, and I think most people, historians would agree, was not a particularly great one, and justified to some extent the protest. But the ultimate outcomes are hard to say. So as a result, the Supreme Council of Armed Forces ruled after Mubarak stepped down for a period, and then the Muslim Brotherhood, through a series of popular elections, gained control of the country, and Mohamed Morsi was elected president in 2012 after the revolution. The Muslim Brotherhood is a very, some say potentially still politically somewhat prominent now. However, el-Sisi ultimately took quite a big step away from the Muslim Brotherhood and Morsi. In August 12th of 2012, el-Sisi was chosen to replace Mohammed Hussein Tantawi, as Commander-in-Chief and Minister of Defense and Production for the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. And this was an appointment by Morsi, maybe not directly from Morsi, because he was little known at the time, or el-Sisi was little known at the time. It's hard to say to what extent they had a relationship, as we'll see. El-Sisi essentially betrays Morsi, but he was el-Sisi as a non-major public figure was chosen to be the head of the military at that point, the Supreme Council of Armed Forces. So as head of the Egyptian Armed Forces, he was, as mentioned, chosen by Morsi, and he was also promoted to the rank of Colonel General. The FJP party, which was Morsi's party, which supposedly was independent of the Muslim Brotherhood, but in all intents and purposes was run by mostly leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood. On their website, it stated that el-Sisi was the defense minister with a revolutionary taste. So you can take away what you want with that, but obviously el-Sisi was sympathetic or generally agreed with the what took place in the revolution of 2011, or at least was not openly opposed to it at this point. He was also a minister of defense in the Condé cabinet, which was also appointed by Morsi. It said that many people thought that there was criticisms of el-Sisi saying that el-Sisi was just chosen by the Muslim Brotherhood and he was the hand, as described, the hand of the Muslim Brotherhood. However, he denied this, saying that the hand that harms any Egyptian must be cut. But interestingly enough, the people thought that this meant that he doesn't stand by the Muslim Brotherhood, but instead stood by the people. However, Morsi, symbolically the Muslim Brotherhood, thought that he meant he would not allow the government to be overthrown. But nevertheless, there was a coup in 2013, June 30th, starting June 30th, to overthrow Morsi and opposition to the Muslim Brotherhood. But el-Sisi also opposed not only the Muslim Brotherhood, but also the Salafi Noor Party, which is the centrist party, as well as the liberal April 6th movement, which was a youth movement. So he was essentially opposed to everyone, but as leader of the military, in effect, he led to the overthrow of Morsi. So maybe he was never supported the Muslim Brotherhood at all, or maybe he just saw it as a path for himself to gain power. It's hard to say, but nonetheless, the hand that gave him the success, that being Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood, he essentially overthrew. In the Washington Post, in the aftermath, he said to the Americans that you left the Egyptians, you turned your back on the Egyptians, and they won't forget you for that. So this is when he started criticizing the Obama administration. That's why the Obama administration, and generally the United States population, does not have a very positive perspective of el-Sisi. In the anniversary of the coup, he thanked the Emirati, or the United Arab Emirates, as well as Iraq, Bahrain, and Moroccan and Jordanian defense ministers in a visit to Egypt. And then in 2013, he was actually also, after this coup, elected Time Person of the Year. And after this, the interim president, Adli Mansour, was placed as interim president, and they disbanded the Shura Council. At this time, because he was symbolically the leader of the overthrow of Morsi and a champion of the people, he developed a cult of personality, and all of those who would protest against Morsi became protesters for el-Sisi, and he became a very, very popular figure. With this, very soon after, on 8th of June of 2014, he was sworn into office as president. The people were so pleased with this, there was an impromptu national holiday, but they invited many leaders from other nations. However, Turkey, Tunisia, and Qatar were not invited for criticizing his events against Morsi and the coup, as well Israel for other reasons. Obviously, they didn't support the coup, but more because of their relations with Palestine were also not invited. Tahrir Square was flocked with millions of people. They had to get police barricades and all kinds of security measures, and they were checking with metal detectors for explosions because this was a huge, huge event, the election of their essentially war hero. In the final speech, he obviously toured around giving many speeches at Kuba Palace, which was attended by 1,200 people. He stated that in the next phase, this is the second quote here, Egypt will witness a total rise on both internal and external fronts to compensate what we missed and correct the mistakes of the past. So at this point, he is obviously a very clear champion of the people, and they still do today have very high hopes and expectations for what he might achieve, and in effect, essentially also has achieved. It's, I think, kind of not directly parallel, but I think a nice parallel would be like the triumphs in ancient Rome. That's what I was thinking of here. For example, notably Pompeii, where they, after conquering, they would come in on their, for example, in Pompeii, bringing elephants and all kinds of things and just all kinds of people cheering. But this is a little bit different because he didn't conquer another state. He actually conquered his own state. But nonetheless, he had a much popular support, and I think we could definitely consider him to be a populist. He also, by his first presidential decree, was to give the Order of the Nile to Adli Mansour. Order of the Nile is the highest award that can be given out in Egypt, kind of maybe perhaps like the Medal of Honor in the United States or the Victoria Cross in the United Kingdom, and the Canada as well has the Victoria Cross to the interim president Adli Mansour. In terms of his actual policies, since he has been president, One of his first appearances with cabinet was on a 20-kilometer bike marathon where he showed up in full biking gear to encourage low fuel consumptions, fuel consumptions had been hurting the Egyptian economy. He formed an advisory council of scientists and experts. So evidently, I think, despite having much confidence in his abilities, he at least or outwardly shows that he will listen to experts. He has spoken out against sexual assault issues in the country. Notably, he had visited a hospital where there was a sexual assault victim, and he has obviously denounced such actions. He's the first president in the history of the country to attend a Christmas mass in Egypt. During Christmas time, he visited one of the Christmas masses, and he called for unity for amongst the Christian and Muslim people. And this was actually very popular on Twitter, so kind of similar to Hameed, obviously pretty close in terms of understanding social media and the influences of Twitter, but also a symbol of unity. I don't know if the same could be said with his relation to Judaism, but maybe that might just be against particularly the Israeli government and not necessarily Judaism as a religion. But nonetheless, his relationship with Christians seems to be more positive. Human Rights Watch, however, has criticized him for using torture, and as well as the extrajudicial killing of Islamic affiliate Wilia Suyana. So obviously extrajudicial killings aren't very good, but nonetheless, this action was actually praised by Donald Trump, and Amnesty International has criticized him for being one of the committing some of the most heinous war crimes and killing many individuals. But even his originally coming into power was the result of great violence. So I think obviously violence is something that he is not afraid to implement, but I obviously don't advocate for the use of torture. I think those are obviously very, very wrong things to do, but I don't think it's something that shouldn't be expected of someone who gained power through a coup d'etat. Similarly, he has also engaged in arbitrary arrests of people as young as 12 years old, which are obviously wrong as well. In terms of mass demonstrations in 2019, he stated that there were many radical Islamic protests. He stated that as long as we have political Islam movements that aspire for power, our region will remain in a state of instability. So I think this is very important to note, and as I mentioned, in terms of Hameed, despite both of these individuals being very prominent political actors, they're not... it's not through political Islam that they're representing it. They're not representing their presidency through the sole scope of Islam. Obviously, both of these individuals are Muslim, but they, particularly in this quote, el-Sisi actually denounces political Islam. He thinks that, for example, something that's a very common philosophy is the separation of church and state. And I think that's something that he and Hameed both emphasize, and I think that is positive. As I mentioned, there are benefits of reading the Quran. It is a great book with a lot of morality, but also some things that are not necessarily should be taken word for word. But nonetheless, a church and state should be separate, and that's what el-Sisi demonstrated there in light of the protests and demonstrations in 2019. But nonetheless, he's kind of hovered around 79%, 78% approval rating. 11 people, about 10% just outwardly don't like him, and the remaining just don't really have a stance. So nonetheless, despite a lot of the criticism he gets from those in the West, particularly under the Obama administration in the United States, he's actually really well liked within Egypt, and particularly within the Muslim community. But is it based on merit or based on the fact that he overthrew the last tyrant, that being Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood? It's hard to say, but I do think his stance on separation of church and state is a good one. In terms of economy, Moody's, as a result of his strong efforts, has improved his credit rating from negative to stable. Fitch Ratings improved his rating from a B- to a B, and S&P has upgraded him to a B- as well. So the credit ratings across Egypt have improved. Probably this might not necessarily be the result of his actual economic initiatives, but just the increased stability in Egypt after Morsi. But nonetheless, but also, once again, the 2008 financial crisis, most of the reason why there was the collapse was that the credit ratings were rating the mortgage-backed securities too high, and there was too much investment in them, when in fact the credit ratings should have been much lower. So two things here. Firstly, is it his fault? Hard, can't entirely say. But secondly, can we really trust the credit ratings entirely? Also a nuanced opinion as well. But nonetheless, his energy subsidies of 96 billion has made petrol one of the cheapest in the world in Egypt. And I think this is partially because he's, Saudi essentially runs the petroleum industry, not only in the Middle East or Africa, but the entire world. And his efforts have been kind of to give some more power back to Egypt in this respect. The economy has been expected to grow between 4 to 5%, which is above GDP, but for a country that has a GDP of only 250.9 billion, which is even smaller than Bangladesh, we'd like to see even higher growth rates, perhaps. But nonetheless, the 4 to 5% growth rates are kind of difficult to say in times of COVID-19, so only time can tell how they come out of it. His new Suez Canal project in 2014 is planned to increase the revenues of the Suez Canal by 259%. And they also have discussions of working on a deal with Russia as well with this Suez Canal project. But going with respect to Russia, in terms of Russia supported the Morsi overthrow, and in effect el-Sisi, when the United States didn't. So his relationship with Russia is debatably better. Similarly, supposedly they have a $3 billion weapons agreement. So obviously they're trade partners, but also they have better relations than that with U.S. Particularly on Obama, their relationship wasn't very positive, as Obama did not, as el-Sisi, help in his overthrow of Morsi. However, similarly, another anecdote was when John Kerry came to visit Egypt. They put him through metal detectors, which the United States saw as a sign of disrespect. But nonetheless, the relations with Trump has improved. However, most recently, when Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, this did upset el-Sisi. But one could be said, his actual quote here was not necessarily that it was a step against Muslim, but he said that this would undermine the chances of peace in the Middle East. So once again, I don't think it's coming solely from the stance of religion, but a stance of a higher purpose as his role as a president, and to try to achieve peace. Obviously, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, even though it in effect is obviously not is obviously going to upset many people, especially those people who do prescribe to political Islam. In terms of his personal life, unlike the previous president Mubarak, he has kept his private life pretty quiet. He married his cousin, as mentioned earlier, Intisar, who he met in high school, and then married at 25 after graduating from the military academy. He has 3 sons and 1 daughter, which I said is precisely the same ratio as Hameed. I don't think probably mostly chance, but I just think it's actually quite coincidental. He's considered to be they call him the quiet general, because he's a quiet person despite his many of the big speeches he's given and the essential triumphs he's done. But he's more quiet in terms of his actual room presence. He is a pretty devout Muslim. He quotes Quranic verses quite frequently. His wife does wear often a hijab. However, it's a more progressive hijab where she's allowed an exposed neck. But once again, I think it's good that he follows a religion. I think it's a good place to get morality. It's just a great book. If you criticize any of the great religions, then you have you have no right to not criticize every single other book, because they're probably a closer approximation to the moral ideals than any other book on this planet. If you think Oliver Twist is more moral than the Quran, then you're, I think, sadly mistaken. But nonetheless, he believes in the separation of church and state, which is something that Hameed also believes, which is very important. So in terms of the images, here's the flag of Egypt, as mentioned previously. The population, 98.4 million, quite a bit smaller than about 2/3 of the size of Bangladesh. GDP, 250.9 billion, a little bit smaller than Bangladesh, a little bit small for the global economy. There are billionaires a few individuals who are more than this, but I think the money doesn't speak all. I think Egypt has a lot of military power, and I think that GDP is not necessarily a direct measure of strength. But the area is actually much larger than Bangladesh, almost 10 times the size at 1,010,000 or 1,010,000 kilometers squared. In terms of the quotes, I covered two of them. The others are just the last one. Morsi failed to meet the demands of the Egyptian people, and the Muslim Brotherhood has incited violence and disturbed general security and peace. So that was just his speech to denounce Morsi, where he ultimately took the shift from being one who was put into power by the Morsi government and then ultimately fought against it. In terms of the similar symbols, here's the flag of Cairo. Down here is the flag of this. The very bottom is the flag of the government of the president, of Egypt. Up here, the second from the top is the symbol of the army of Egypt, and down below is the symbol of is also a symbol of the president of Egypt. So in terms of the comparison, and then we'll talk a little bit about Egyptian mythology, which I think ties in very well to this. So similar, they had the same children ratio, 3 boys, 1 girl. They both had a pretty prominent individual who helped them rise to power. In in el-Sisi's case, Morsi really, in effect, got him where he was. And Sheikh Rahman, who was the leader of the revolution in Bangladesh, really helped Hamid get to where he wanted to be. However, in Morsi's case, or el-Sisi's case, he sort of went against his leader, whereas Hamid sort of stayed that path. So with respect, one is, I guess that's just the conclusion there, is that Hamid stuck by his path, whereas el-Sisi sort of split off. But I think one of the main conclusions here is that they both had an independence of thought with respect to what was going on in the governancy. Hamid believed that Bangladesh should be independent of Pakistan, and he fought through the government to achieve that. And as well, el-Sisi saw that the Muslim Brotherhood and Morsi should be no longer in control of the government, and he fought to oppose this. So what I want to say here is that they had an independence of thought with respect to the government, but they did not have an independence of thought with respect to the population. So I think they saw a sort of arbitrage in that the people want this, but the government is like this. So they, as a leader, they led the people to achieve what they wanted. So independence of thought with respect to the leadership, but non-independence of thought with respect to the people. So this is where we'll get into the mythology. So in ancient Egypt, this obviously comes from Egyptian mythology, but I think it applies to all politics globally. So originally, there was the first god in Egyptian mythology was Osiris. And Osiris is symbolically the father, and symbolically conservatism and order. And he is killed by an individual named Set, who is symbolically chaos. So Osiris's wife, her name was Isis, and she is symbolically chaos. Symbolically, chaos is the feminine, and symbolically, order is the masculine. And I think that actually might tie into that. Females tend to be slightly more left-wing, and males tend to be slightly more right-wing. There are obviously differences, but that's just naturally because men naturally tend to hold the seats of power, which symbolically leads to a sign of conservatism. But nonetheless, between the conservative Osiris and the chaotic Isis, they had a son named Horus. And Horus is symbolically, he has symbolically a falcon eye. So what he does is Osiris, symbolically order, is destroyed by Set. So he is destroyed by chaos. And it is Horus, with the help of his mother Chaos, who puts Osiris back together again. So what this symbolically represents is how all states, order becomes too powerful. It falls into tyranny. Those who have power become too powerful. And then the people, symbolically chaos, overthrow it. And it's just sort of a natural trend that societies go into. For example, in Russia, for example, the upper class gained too much power, and the communists, representing the people, overthrew and destroyed the hierarchies and destroyed symbolically the Osiris. However, that's why Horus is chosen to be king of the gods, and symbolically the eye is that it's Osiris's job as son of chaos and order to keep his eye open, symbolically the eye, and fix things, put things back together. It's that society will get tyrannical, it must be broken, but it is the job of the wise one to put it back together. I think another, I've never heard this reference before, but I think it would be a cool note of symbolism, is that he's a falcon. Falcons have wings. In his image, he doesn't have wings, but we have the left wing and the right wing. Without Horus, the king of the gods, to have both wings, to put things back together and balance chaos and order, conservatism and liberalism, or conservatism, right wing and left wing. It's his job to keep things together. And then one final point with respect to this is actually on the United States dollar bill. At the top of the pyramid, which is also reference to Egypt, is the eye, which is symbolically Horus. So the point is, to get to a higher power, you need the eye of Horus. You must keep your eye open to tyranny, but you must also keep your eye open to chaos. He must watch for Osiris and Set, or Osiris and Isis, and it is the job of Horus and the job of the wise individual to balance the two, and if things break, to put it back together again. And that's exactly what I think is very clear with respect to these two individuals, in that after Bangladesh broke off from Pakistan, it was Hamid who is the wise, we could call him Horus, to keep things back together again. And with respect to el-Sisi, we could see him a little bit like a Set, in that he destroyed some of the tyrannies that were prevalent in Egypt at the time. However, it is his job to keep his eye open, symbolically as Horus, and manage chaos and order. So that's a little bit of Egyptian mythology. I think it's very interesting and applies to all governmental structures. Every government since, as you saw with ancient Greek and Roman history, there was the populares and the optimates, which are the chaos and order. Populares are the people, who symbolically run into anarchy, and the optimates were symbolically the tyrants, who fall into tyranny, and Osiris and Isis. And it is the job of the wise leader and wise individual to keep things together, balance chaos and order. So I don't think any government would function without a left wing and without a right wing, and that's why I think on the very most important symbol of the United States, at the very top of the pyramid, is the eye of Horus. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you continue to watch other documentaries that I'll be creating in the future, and share ideas with me. Thanks so much. Bye.